Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Wattsburg Area School District, where we are student-centered and future-focused for a world-class education. The January 15th, 2024 regular board meeting is now called to order. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May we please have a roll call?
Present.
Here. Here.
Here. Here.
Mr. Williams.
Here. Here.
Mr. Blazer.
Present. Thank you. I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda and addendum.
So moved. Pushcheck.
Morvay, second.
Any discussion or revision to tonight's agenda and addendum? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries. The agenda and addendum are approved. I will entertain a motion to approve the minutes from the December 4th, 2023 Board Reorganization and Regular Board Meeting and the January 8th work session.
So moved. Young.
Second, Burlingham.
There is an error in the minutes.
Just a second. Any discussion or question to the minutes? Mr. Rummagin?
Yes. The minutes from the reorganization meeting list that Mr. Blazer expressed the resignation of Mr. O'Donnell was approved with regret. That was actually Mr. Morvay. In the video, it was marked 2433.
Thank you.
I also have some questions on the work session minutes.
Go ahead.
I have concerns over the use of the word discussed. In the minutes, it says 7 times that the board discussed items where no discussion took place. The opposite is true. The chairman actually said hearing none. Is using the word discuss the proper word for our minutes?
I understand. So as an example, I'm just looking at the minutes now for a work session, says, and this was an area that I reported on, so the board discussed the exoneration of delinquent property taxes, something we'll be voting on, obviously, in a couple of minutes here. So my understanding is that when I read my statement, which was, let me remind myself what I said, that the legal advisement, that I read off what we have a motion on our agenda for today, that was the discussion. Now, I think what you're referring to is no one had any questions and comments, and so it was a statement that I made, and then hearing nothing, we added it to the agenda. Am I summarizing that sort of correctly, or do you have more to add?
You're summarizing that correct. I take a discussion as a two-way conversation. Minutes are a legal, historical representation of the meeting. And I think it potentially could be misleading to our residents who are reading the minutes at home if we continue to word it discussed when no discussion was taking place, especially when it says we discussed the audit report when the audit report wasn't created until after the meeting. Can we look at using different language?
Have any other comments or
I have no problem
discussion
with the language as written.
the current
It
minutes?
hasn't been a historical issue, ever. So
Okay.
I'm fine with the way it is.
I understand the logic behind the word discussed. It can very easily be understood as a conversation between the two. What the right alternative phrase would be, that is more of a statement versus a true discussion. I understand it's discussed by being brought up and then motioned and approved, as coming forward. That could be a discussion in and of itself, but I can also understand that the discussion also construes a two-way dialogue. So if there is an alternative phrase, I'm fine with that too. I just don't know exactly what that would be, how to say that properly. If an item is brought up for review and there is no comment, maybe I'll use the word comment, maybe that's the right phrase, there was no comments from the board. I don't know.
I wrote down that the board identified the topic had no further discussion. Wouldn't that more accurately depict what happened.
Can you just say that one more time?
The board identified the topic and had no further discussion.
Instead of the board
Discussed.
The board discuss.
Well, I don't think it materially changes.
It doesn't change it from my viewpoint either. It does, the purpose, as we discussed, I think at the end of the work session, is just to put these items on to our agenda for tonight. So whether we discuss them, whether we review them and
I agree.
and further
but
discuss.
Board policy 006 says that we have to have our minutes, and our minutes are a historical artifact.
Right.
So I
I mean, it
just,
doesn't matter.
maybe this is just me.
Minutes
But I
are
would
not
think-
also a verbatim record of what went on.
No, but they should,
Are
but
a
should they
general-
not
Minutes are a
accurately
gen-
reflect what happened?
Minutes are a general report of what occurred at the meeting.
I would agree. No discussion happened.
And if anyone would like to, as you did, view the video for particulars, if they want a verbatim report of what occurred at the meeting.
Per our policy, the video is not relevant to our policies and procedures. It's an add-on. The minutes are what matter.
Well, I don't think we need to change the minutes. I think they serve the purpose quite well.
I think that we could have a further board discussion about the
Thank you.
verbiage that we have in our minutes going forward. I guess for the purposes of tonight's meeting, I don't see that they're in error. I can see clarification and stating it in a different way going forward, Mr. Remigan, is something to consider. But I guess I'm not looking at there's an error, like you said, that by reviewing the video, that I didn't thank Mr. O'Donnell, and I could have swore I did thank Mr. O'Donnell, or wished he hadn't left us so early. So maybe that is something is failing in my memory of what happened in the reorganization meeting. Was there any, did you have anything else? I don't want to cut you off, Mr. Remigan, if you
If
had
we can
more.
discuss that further at a later time, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, take note. Any other discussion or corrections? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay? The motion carried, the minutes are approved. The chair recognizes Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Ken Berlin, for school reports.
Thank you, Mr. President. This evening, it's a pleasure to turn things over to Mr. Paris, the principal of Wattsburg Area Middle School. He'd like to talk a little bit about something special that happened there involving one of our students. So I will let Mr. Paris take it from here.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Tonight we want to recognize one of many awesome students we have at the middle school. Schools, they're up here. I have a little PowerPoint to show you, and I'm going to have you take a quiz, because this is all related to the seventh grade PSSA assessment, and I want to show you some of the questions that are on that test, on that assessment, before we bring Angela down to recognize her. This is not working. All right, so the first question. Thank you. First question, this is a question on the PSSA. These are released items from the PSSA, from the state, that our teachers use they walk our students right through these questions throughout the school year. And these are test questions that have actually been on the PSSAs over the years, and they've just released them to the public for public use. So this first one, the first part of the PSSA math test, there's probably 5 or 6 questions that you cannot use a calculator on. So this first question for you is, what is the value of the expression that is shown there? And typically, you have about a minute to a minute and a half to answer these questions. They have all day to take the test, the assessment. But typically, for multiple choice, they have about a minute and a half to 2 minutes. And the open-ended, they have 3 to 5 minutes. So, question number 1. Anyone have an answer? A. A. Everyone agree with A?
Sure.
So click on A. So A is the correct answer, and it gives you a description on each one and why it's either right or wrong. And then you can see the percentage value A, that's the percent of students that got that question correct. So only 47% of seventh graders during that time that question was active got that question correct. Okay, question number 2. You can use a calculator for these questions. So Jerry is packing dishes into boxes to be shipped. It takes Jerry 2 3/4 hours to pack 4 1/2 boxes. At this rate, how many boxes of dishes can Jerry pack in 1 hour?
Good question.
All right, who's the carpenter here?
So if you think you have an answer, just blurt it on out. I think it's C.
C?
I think it's C. Mr. Blazer says C, and that is correct. But only 36% of students get that question correct. So that is, letter C is correct. Okay, question number 3. A restaurant buys the eggs it uses from a farmer. The cost to buy 50 dozen eggs from the farmer is $109.50. The restaurant buys 8 dozen eggs each day for the farmer. The restaurant buys the eggs 7 days each week. Which equation can be used to determine the total amount Y in dollars the restaurant spends on the eggs it buys from the farmer for X weeks? And this, again, this is obviously a multiple choice question. What do you think? We got anything?
No, see.
I'd say B.
I can't understand where B comes from.
My old eyes can't even see that.
I was like, the X
Made
is
it as big as I could.
You can't use that as a blame.
I'm going to
She's
say
got
I
her
would like
glasses
to
on.
report that I'm a social worker, and we don't typically do math. That's my answer.
That's your answer.
Lee, I'm gonna need an accommodation.
You use one eye and I'll use the other.
Yeah.
Anything? All right, the correct answer is letter B.
I said that.
You did.
This is the correct.
You did. You were confident of saying.
And you can see from that,
Well, that's what I would put on my
34%,
You whispered it.
That's what I would put on my paper.
34% of the students, only 34% of students got that answer correct. Okay. This one, you don't have to solve this one. This is an open-ended question. This is one that you can take, kids could take 3 to 5 minutes to answer typically. Again, they have all day to take it during that time. This is talking about a book report. So open-ended questions are worth, they're worth 12 points, or 4 points, and then there's 3 of them on the test, so that equals 12 points. And then they have, so this is letter A, and then if you click it again, this is 1 point, and go ahead one more time. This is part B of the same question, and this is another 1 point, so go ahead and click that again. And then there's a third part, part C, and this part is worth 2 points. And they score these on a rubric, if you click one more time, anywhere from a 0 to a 4 to show mastery on that. And for this particular question, what they do on the released items, they give you different examples, what a 4 looks like, what a 3 looks like, what a 2, and so on and so forth. So the teachers, the math teachers use this information. They walk the kids right through these problems and show how, where the mistakes were made, what constitutes a 4. Obviously, not writing anything will give you a 0, but anyway, for this particular question, if you click one more time, the mean score in this question was just over 1. Okay. The average on this question was 1. So they do get complicated. They are multi-step, especially when you get to the open-ended. And there are 3 of these on the PSSA test. So if you go to the next one. So your quiz is over. You did okay. About a 3 is not bad. So the test is broken up. There's 40 multiple choice questions for 40 points. There's 3 4-point open-ended items for 12 points, which equals 52 points. So in 2021, there were 5 perfect scores in the state of Pennsylvania out of 90,812 assessments in 7th grade. In 2022, there were 77 perfect scores out of 118,000 plus. 2023, we don't know yet, but we know there's one because we had one at the middle school. And Angela, you want to come on down? So Angela received a perfect score of 52 out of 52. And this should look familiar to you if you have some kids in the district. They all get a PSSA report. And it's broken down in reporting categories. A number system, she got 9 out of 9. Ratios and proportional relationships, 13 out of 13. Expressions and equations, 13 out of 13. Geometry, 9 out of 9. And statistics and probability, 8 out of 8. So on behalf of myself and Mrs. Pebbles, who's here, and Mrs. Boyd, who was her 7th grade math teacher, we have a certificate of excellence for her receiving a perfect score on her PSA. This is not a pizza. It's just a
Cookie
nutrition
cake.
group made a cookie cake for Angela. So you can share with the nutrition group. It just says congratulations, Angela, with a bunch of multiplication and symbols on it that she can share with her family. So congratulations. One other thing with Angela, we talk about achievement and growth on the PSSA. Angela, since she's been here 5, 6, and 7, she showed growth on each test. I mean, ultimately, she did the best this past in 7th grade, but each year she showed growth in 5th grade, 6th grade, and 7th grade. So
That's amazing. Angela, you should be so proud of yourself. That is phenomenal. I am so proud that you're in our district. Great job.
Congratulations.
And when the results come out in the spring, we'll see how many kids scored a perfect score. And we actually had a couple other students at the middle school that came very, very close to having a perfect score. So we almost had two or three to add with Angela.
Is that all that running
on the
you
math
make her
test, this past week. So we continue to work hard down there, and the kids work extremely hard. So again, congratulations.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
I do have to say, after seeing some of those questions, I feel like I should bake my kids cakes or something that week. Something really phenomenal.
Well, congrats to Angela and parents. Good job as well. And I know the Fishers are a very competitive family, so Andrew, Annabelle, coming up next couple of years, we can see you guys as well. You get a big cookie cake. I mean, it's worth it, right?
And obviously, along with Mrs. Boyd as well, who we all know is phenomenal, but you're just kicking butt educating our kids, so we appreciate you too.
Absolutely. Good
Yes,
job.
thank you.
That's it for school reports tonight.
That'll do it for school reports.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is guest and citizen comments. No one has signed up to speak to the board this evening, so the chair recognizes Dr. Ken Berlin for superintendent's report.
Mr. President, I just wanted to share a few slides here real quick about where we're going, just a few things that'll come up this spring in front of the board. And then talk a little bit about what we're learning with the budget and the unfair school funding lawsuit that was successful against the state of Pennsylvania last spring. I know it's a dense slide, but just a few things that are going to happen. We try to do a couple safety response protocol drills. And the state allows us to sub one of those for a fire drill. So we typically do that in January. So we'll be sending a letter home. And this is our new protocol, Secure. It used to be referred to as Lock Out, which some people confused with Lock Down. So the organization responsible for these protocols has changed that to Secure. So we will practice that campus-wide coming up here in a couple weeks. And then I had mentioned next month, Mrs. Kelly and the principals are going to give you an update on where we're at academically, PSSA, and with our benchmarks such as Acadians and IXL. I also have some board policies. It'll be the first time for this board as it's constituted. Nothing groundbreaking. These are policy recommendations that have flowed out of our legal service, PSBA, that we subscribe to. They mostly keep their ear to the ground to look for recent case law that might impact our policy, but there's also quite a volume of state laws that are enacted each year connected to the budget process. And if you hear the term on the code school bus bill, there's one of those attached to almost without exception to every budget. Our Omnicode school bus bill this year was held up because the legislature was arm wrestling over about $1 billion, which finally got settled and in December. And there's some good news to that. I'll share that with you, a little bit for us anyways. So board policy updates, and I'll give you an executive summary so that you can look through those things. And I try to explain things in layman's terms. We'll have Attorney Kennedy, Attorney McClure probably look those over as well. The comprehensive plan is something that we're required to, this process to engage in as a school district. Every school district is. I think it's every 3 years is the cycle, pretty close to that. And Mrs. Kelly has been leading that effort. So at some point, we will talk with you this spring about the comprehensive plan because the board will have to consider it. The board has given me a goal, asked me to serve as the liaison between our salaried employees and the board to put together pieces of the Act 93 agreements, renewing them, so to speak. The first step in the process is that the board engaged PSBA, the School Board Association, to do an updated compensation study. So they have the job description for every employee that falls into this category of plan or agreement. It's not a contract. And they are looking at a combination of the market value and other similar districts in terms of finance, size, and average daily membership. So we're probably going to be looking at that together in February to get an idea for what the finances might look like. Just like our teacher compensation package, our administrators are probably low in the market as well. We generally are fairly low, and we are a small district. We do the best that we can and try to find good people. So, you know, that's not a comment on who we are or what kind of job we do. It's just, you know, what we pay our folks is what we can do, and we do the best that we can do. But we'll consider where we're at in relation to others in the market, because we do have to be able to attract people, quality candidates. Miscellaneous, we had been planning to replace the wrestling mat, actually all the wrestling mats. We've been periodically moving through committed fund balance or committing funds to fund balance or to committed, Vicki, correct me on the terms, I'm using the wrong term.
Committing funds
Committing
for
funds.
projects.
For projects assigned from it. So we've been doing that and moving through different programs trying to address some long neglected needs. And the mats, the wrestling program, have been on the list for quite a while now. It was all held up because of pandemic supply chain things. So we did get a notice that those are going to be arriving finally. I mean, I think it's been well over a year and a half, maybe more, since we
I think we ordered them over a year ago.
Yeah. So that'll be nice for our facilities and our students. And why would I put the sewer plant on here? I just wanted to give the board a heads up that we are renewing our permits for our sewage plant because we are not on Erie or public sewer. We have our own facility. And to renew the permits at some point here in the near future, we're going to have to post on the campus and by the facility that it's being reviewed, and those notices might look odd to people. So if somebody says something to you, you'll know that, no, we're not being cited by a government agency or anything out of the ordinary. We're going through a renewal process. We'll talk more about that. Those requirements are getting more stringent, so we'll probably have to budget for an increase in sewer plant monitoring for next year. We have been working with a firm out of Edinburgh that handles facilities. Okay, so good news out of the state budget that was resolved. One thing that is coming out our way would be mental health grants. We have received a couple of these in the past. We've received safety and security grants. That's how we started our SRO program here. So this is another round, and we'll be getting together. This just came out. We'll be getting together with a few of the admin team and applicable mental health folks to look at the allowable programs to see where we're at, because that second to the last bullet, level 1 baseline criteria, you have to show that you have that level of programming, and then you start moving up the list. So in all likelihood, we're way above level 1 in just about every area. But this is a chance for us to examine it, and it's based on a formula. So if we put the grant together, it's not like it's a competitive grant. But every time we get one of these things, it does enhance our programs. All right, so the school funding lawsuit, just a quick timeline. There was a coalition of parents and legislators and schools, school board associations, and other lobby groups that sued the state of Pennsylvania because they feel their claim was that the state is not funding education equitably in Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of school districts that bear an undue burden to educate their students, and they should be made whole for years of underfunding. In other words, districts that are paying much more in local funds, receiving much less from the state than other districts to maintain the same kind of programming. It's an inequity. So a judge agreed with them and ruled that the legislature does have to address this. So the timeline, September was kind of the first gate. They formed a bipartisan committee, funding commission committee, to look at how schools are funded. So those reports were just put together and finally delivered last week on the 11th. And I watched the whole thing, as exciting as it was. If you've ever watched some of those meetings they have in the House there, they can be a little bit dry. But at the end of the day, I was disappointed, and as many were, that the committee came forth with two reports. They kind of broke into two factions along party lines and had competing reports. So the majority report was approved by, I think, a margin of one vote. I might have put put up the tally there. And that report is saying, look, 5.1 billion is what our calculations and our formula, proposed formulas, is meant to restore over a period of time school districts that have been inequitably funded from the state. Unfortunately, the report, as a lot of these do, only has recommendations. It does not have a directive for action by the governor or action from the legislature to act. Now, I mean, it can't be dodged forever unless it goes back to court. Most analysis think that the court ruling was on pretty solid footing with the data that was presented, so that's unlikely. But this is just a visual depiction of school districts in Pennsylvania and the amount to which they've been inadequately funded to support their students at a high-performing level. So the formulas that both committees are proposing do have a student performance aspect to it. So it's not just let's give additional funds to school districts. We want to make sure that they have best practices in place, so they marry the two things together for accountability purposes, so that the funds are spent appropriately and directed towards improving student achievement in those schools. Interesting map. I'm sure we'll see many more as the negotiation gets into swing. But when will that happen? Governor Shapiro, he's due to put out his budget address beginning of February. Pennsylvania governors always do this, and it's largely a work of fiction. It's kind of like their dream list. And the PA legislature may ignore the whole thing, may take a piece or two of it, but we never know until we get to the end. And as you can see this past year, we never really know when the end is sometimes. Unlike a school district, we have to say, okay, by June 30th, we're passing a budget. So it would be a tall order, in my opinion, to make a significant change in the basic ed formula and distribute $5.1 billion. And there's some factors, too, to consider outside of the lawsuit. It's an election year, so drastic partisan moves are made slowly, if at all, in this kind of environment. And there are repairs going on at the PA Capitol building because it's leaking water significantly, so they're not planning to convene until into March. So that doesn't leave much runway to work on the regular Pennsylvania school budget. The really good news is that some of the spreadsheets that Vicki and I have looked at with these proposed formulas shows that we are a district that would benefit financially over a 5-year period. So it would increase the amount of state funding that we receive. Those formulas are complicated, and like I said, it'll probably change before it's finalized into some type of solution that the courts would accept. So that may be next year. I don't count on it saving the day this year. I think our budgeting process is probably going to look similar to what it has been, minus the pandemic funds that we put into the budget and then have carefully feathered out so that we're not in a situation like Mr. DeTano was talking about, where now we've got huge holes in the budget because we took pandemic money and just started stuffing it into operations. We were very strategic at how we did that. So what remains to be seen there?
Dr. Berlin, real quick.
Yes.
So in the report that you indicated earlier, there's two tracks then, right? There's one that is the distribution of the $5 billion, and then there's also the change of the funding formula going forward. Or does the one cause the other? The funding formula causes the distribution of the 5?
That's a great question. So there is a basic ed funding formula that was hashed over significantly, I don't know, 8 to 9 years ago, maybe a little more. And it was the solve-all, be-all formula. But this report shows that it did not close the inequities fast enough. And a lot of the actuary calculations show that that formula would eventually make things right over a 50-year period. I'm just speaking in the general numbers that I remember from one of the presentations. But that's a lot of what drove this lawsuit, is the fair funding formula we have right now is not fair. So this formula takes some of that and stacks a few other factors on top to come up with this number that will make districts whole. So we may get a down payment initially, followed by 4 years of increases in revenue. Those are the models that we've seen so far. So even though these...
And then at the 6th year, those levels would be sustained.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
fair.
you'd start
Okay.
getting increases.
Yeah. Okay.
But it would help, I mean, we're a small district with sparsity, and we're trying to, and no business to speak of, and we're trying to maintain all the options that a county school that has businesses with a more robust tax base that's not houses and residents can sustain. You know, we like to have lots of electives available. We like to have a full menu of athletic and extracurricular activities, and you do get to a point where now you're kind of rubbing on bare pavement, and you have to make decisions, and that's, you know, we do struggle with that. We kind of bump up against that. So this would go a long way in helping our taxpayers, help alleviate that burden going forward, lessen the need for such a local effort. 50% is a lot. That's a lot. You'd be surprised. A lot of districts are much less than that, 30%. Even lower than that, depending on the area. All right, so I know it's been a long night, but I did want to give you a few of, hey, what's coming up in the next month or two, and just give you an overview of this thing that's hanging out there, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of, it'll be used for conversations and discussions in the budgeting process, but how seriously to take that when we're budgeting here, we need to keep it in perspective. No one's going to, I don't, in my opinion and experience, I don't think it's going to save the day this year anyways. Probably will help us in the future though. All right, so that's all I have, Mr. President.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board for Dr. Berlin regarding his report? I just want to clarify the additional mental health services that are in this year's budget and that will be eligible for. It's just a matter of applying for. Those are additional, you're saying, or they help pay for the mental health services we already are providing?
We won't know until, I don't think I can answer that until we look at the application and the detailed list of allowable expenses.
Sure.
So when they say mental health services, there's the safety and security umbrella covers a lot, and waves of it have been in security, physical investments in the plant, or security personnel like school resource officers, but they're signaling this money is exclusively primarily for soft service money, you know, services, professionals, and serving students. That's probably going to be the lion's share of what would be eligible.
And the 5.1 billion, you were saying that was the calculation they came up with. So that's going back a few years, you're saying. Does that go back to like when the FAIR formula came out? And because since that's what the lawsuit was about, that this didn't really correct what it was intended or is not correcting as quickly?
Yeah, I'd have to look into the report to know the length of time, but they weren't, the report dealt with the formula and inadequacies and how it might be altered or changed to improve. But this lawsuit was not targeted at the existing FAIR funding formula, if that answers your question.
It does.
I think the settlement was more like 6.4 billion. So even that looks to me like, it's a negotiation. It's going to come down to that in the PA legislature.
I see. Thanks. Thank you for your report. The chair recognizes Ms. Figgy Bendig for her report.
Thank you, Mr. President. For this evening, the treasurer's report, as reported last week at the work session, general fund cash in the accounts as of December 31st, 2023, $14,404,431.49. And then I have the budget versus actual report dated December 31st, 2023. And I would like to mention that there was no budget versus actual in December due to the timing of the reorganization meeting. So the current column on this budget versus actual actually includes November and December expenses. So it is double what we would normally see. So again, as of December 31st, we're 50% of the fiscal year completed. And looking at the revenue report first, real estate taxes, we've received 94.54% of our budgeted real estate revenue, and 31% of our total state revenue, 228% of our actually budgeted federal revenue, and 63.02% of overall budgeted revenue. So I'd like to mention at this time that the increase, the 228% of received federal revenue is we've received revenue for the ESSER funds that were not actually budgeted for previously. I also think that there's an error on this report because it says that there was nothing budgeted for Title IV, and that is not true. So I apologize. I will have to get a revised report. The total amount at the bottom is correct, but there's something missing in the title report. So I apologize for that. I'd like to move on to the expense reports. Again, 6 months remaining, 50% of the fiscal year. And some of the categories are well below 50%, some in the 30%. Our social work services category is at this time overspent. This is because we had budgeted in the psychological services category for the behavioral mental health consultants. It was a contracted service, and we actually hired our own social work services. So that's actually a motion on the budgetary transfer to transfer money into the social work services to cover her salary and benefits for the rest of the year. Additionally, I'd like to mention that the categories for capital project transfers is in the negative. It's not budgeted. This is the expenditures of the committed funds that we talked about before. So when the budget is approved in June, we don't actually know what committed fund projects will be done during the year. So those are not actually budgeted for on the general fund budget. And then we do a budgetary amendment. So you cannot make, I cannot make any budgetary changes to the budget for the first 90 days of the fiscal year. So the first time that you're eligible to do a budgetary transfer or making a budgetary amendment is in October. During those months, we're actually still working on wrapping up 22-23, and the local auditors stretched that into the beginning of December. So looking at budgetary transfers, I'm going to be adding a budgetary amendment for probably February to add capital project fund transfers and our federal funding so that it will right-size our budget to what we're actually spending. So that's in addition to the budgetary transfers that are being matched. Also like to mention that the suspense accounts that show a $62,000 negative in those accounts, those are the amounts that we have paid into unemployment compensation. We actually have a insurance plan that we pay for that. And additionally, our workers' comp plan, we pay those, and then that amount of money gets distributed out into the other categories, so instruction, special ed, support services, based on the salaries that are spent in each one of those categories. So typically, we'll do a budgetary transfer towards the end of the year when we know what the proportion is to move those to the other categories, maybe instruction, special ed, principals, business office, superintendent's office, that kind of thing. So overall, expenses at 50% of the year, overall only 40% of the funds are spent. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Mr. President?
Mr. Morbe?
I appreciate Mrs. Bendig's report and comments on the budgetary overruns. In fact, I had sent in a request earlier today, and every one of the items that she has addressed in the various line items that show an overrun, those are the questions I asked. And the explanation to me is understandable, and now makes sense on why some of those things are currently in the red, but will not be in the red going forward. So the reason for my question is just straightforward: is are we completely overspending something in a category? But the majority, if not all, of the items that she has addressed that my questions were are a function of timing and how originally budgeted items come about and then have to be caught up essentially and reconciled as the school year goes along and the fiscal year goes along. So I appreciate her answers, and I am satisfied with those explanations. So I appreciate those. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I have a question.
Mr. Burlingame?
I'm new to all this, Ms. Bendig, but as I look down through the original to adjusted, most of the numbers match. And then I get down to budgetary reserve, and there's a drastic discrepancy. I have no clue why. Can you help me?
Okay, so budgetary reserve is when we plan the budget in February, March, April, May, going forward for next year, I put in budgetary reserve all of the money that we will spend for cyber charter schools, because that is an excludable, budgetary reserve is an excludable expense when they calculate tuition rates for cyber charter schools that we are required to pay. So if I include cyber charter school tuition and budget it where it belongs, we would get charged on that amount of expense. But if I put it in budgetary reserve, it's excluded, meaning it can change our tuition that we pay to cyber charter schools per student from $15,000 a year down to $14,200. So every little bit counts. So I put that $1 million, or in this case, $952,000 in budgetary reserve. And then in October, when we were able to make a budgetary transfer, I transferred almost all of that $900,000 into the correlating instructional, cyber charter tuition expense, and special ed cyber charter student tuition expense. So that's where $990-some thousand of it went, because I put it where it belongs. The remaining amount, which is our true budgetary reserve, which is about $300,000, there were some other transfers that went to teachers that were hired that would cost more than teachers that left the district, or we hired someone and their salary was greater than what was budgeted before. So if you look back through the budgetary transfers for October and November, you may find where I've transferred from budgetary reserve to other categories, which would show the difference. That's what budgetary reserve is for. It's there so in case we have unbudgeted expenses that weren't planned for in the beginning, we've got some money there to quote-unquote play with to be able to cover those expenses.
I'm glad we didn't have $1 million unplanned expense. Thank you for your expertise.
No problem. I can see why you might panic over that.
Just an observation.
Right? Okay, any other questions? Okay, so capital projects, treasury report, as reported last week, $379,682.39. Cafeteria, that fund has $747,102.72. The cafeteria profit and loss, and I do like to do this one by month instead of combining it, so I do have a November report. The November report, total revenue for the month of November, $95,936. And in expenses, we had $99,686.79. So we had a net loss for the month of $3,750.79. I wanted to keep this separate because November was the last month where we had the pricing structure where we received revenue based on CEP at the elementary school and paid lunches, free breakfast, but paid lunches at the middle school and high school. So you'll see that there is student lunch revenue of $10,000 in November. We will not see any student lunch revenue in December, because in December we went to total CEP across the buildings. So looking at the December report, this is as of December 31st, total revenue $80,591, and then total expenses $79,666.34. So we had a net profit of $925.55. Yay! So keep in mind, in December, we have less operating days, so there's less opportunities to feed our kiddos, so there's less revenue coming in. So that's why our revenue in December went from $95,000 in November to $80,000 in December. Plus, changing our structure, we went to total CEP, knowing that it's probably going to cost us a little bit of money because we don't get reimbursed at 100%. We only get reimbursed at about 62%. The rest of them we have to pay as if it was a paid student, which When you have a paid student, typically you've got the money that they're paying, but now they're not paying that. So the food service fund is actually subsidizing those paid students that we're not getting reimbursement for. But as we talked about at the Finance Committee meeting, our cafeteria fund is very healthy due to the federal funding subsidy that we've received due to the pandemic over the last couple of years. Our cafeteria fund prior to that was right around $150,000 to $230,000. Now it's over $700,000. So I think it's the right thing for us to do, as you voted in November to move forward to CEP for December to feed all of our kids. The idea is the cafeteria fund is not supposed to be profiting. The cafeteria fund is just supposed to cover its expenses. So I finished and reported in the end of December the cafeteria fund annual financial report. And if you have more than 3 months in reserve, at that time you have to explain to them why you have more than 3 months in reserve and submit a corrective action plan. Because why didn't you spend this money? Well, I don't know how you could spend enough money when you're handing it to us hand over fist, right? So we do have some equipment that we've replaced. We got a new dish machine. We bought a new combi oven, a combination oven for the middle school. We have some other equipment expenditures planned. We do have quite a significant increase in salary cost due to the collective bargaining agreement negotiations that was settled for this year. So we'll be using some of those planned funds, so I wouldn't expect this net profit to be a giant amount, which is a good thing. So just a little background information on that there. Moving on to the bill list, Exhibit A1, checks written from the board reorganization regular meeting in December through the work session, $265,710.08. Checks written between the work session and this evening, $5,680.27. And then the general fund bills for your consideration this evening for the month of January, $280,184.13. The cafeteria had checks written between the December meeting and the work session, $44,197.80. The cafeteria checks already written between last week and this week, $88.83. And the cafeteria bills for your consideration for this evening, $43,466.29. I believe that is the nutrition group bill. Then the capital project fund bills total $8,234.64, and you'll see a requested transfer on the addendum under Finance F1 transfers that is to cover that bill. And then Exhibit D, the Seneca High School Activity Fund Report. Those are funds in those accounts, $68,514.26 as of December 31st, 2023. That is all I have, if no one has any questions.
I'll entertain a motion to approve the reports, payments, and invoices as presented.
So moved. Pushcheck.
Morvay, second.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion or questions?
Just one question. On Exhibit A1, I have pink highlighter on mine. Is that to draw attention to anything? Does anybody else have pink highlighter? I printed it.
I'm so sorry. So at the beginning of this fiscal year, we wanted to be able to draw your attention to make sure that we are reviewing our federal expenditures. So if there is a pink highlighted line item, those are related to federal funding expenditures. So you're on your bill list. If it's not highlighted, it's general fund. So all of the account strings are on there. So if there's a federal expenditure, it's highlighted in pink. So the check that we wrote to
Mr. Soldata. INST, Soldata.
But that would
Oh.
explain why some of the same ones are highlighted over and over again, because it's going to a
Yes,
specific area.
yes, it's for federal funding.
Thank you.
And those are linked. We have to do that as part of our reporting of those funds, correct? Saying yes.
If I understand
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
you're asking, yes.
Mrs. Bendig, when you went over the cafeteria situation, our good situation, but our healthy financial situation, first of all, I'm remembering the early days of me being on the board where the number was minuscule, if not negative, and now it's enormous. So when we had the audit report, there was, I'll dig it out, but there was a section where they were looking at our expenses in our cafeteria overall, and I want to say the last column all the way to the right sounded like the column that would have like equipment, and it wasn't personnel or salaries, it was like other costs or something like that. And it's looked kind of level over the last 4 or 5 years, but it seems in my memory that we have spent a lot recently on things like the dishwasher, combi oven. So I guess 2 questions. One, have we been kind of level and we've been spending like that for a while and just 4 or 5 years have gone by and I just didn't realize that? And B, do we have more things that you're planning on that we need to replace, that are coming up? I guess at some point, we can't spend $700,000 on new equipment unless we're getting robots to do the food, or I don't know.
So I believe that when food costs were down and we knew we were going to have money and there was a need, I think that was the dish machine. I think it was $50,000, but it was leaking and rusted out and we had to replace it. So there was a steamer that went. So I try not to spend all of the money in one fiscal year. So, okay, well, what do we need this year? What's the recommendation? And we've been trying to apply for grants there are some equipment grants that come up. We have not since I've been the food service director, we've not been eligible to get the grant. It just, when the money runs out, it goes to schools that are in greater need. So, but it's still nice to have the new equipment, and we have a healthy fund balance, so we've been buying things each year. We did a combi oven at the elementary school last year or the year before, and then one at the middle school. Each school would really like to have 2. So once we kind of get through, and we need new serving lines at the elementary school to be a little more, the heating elements underneath, those are getting bad, they've been replaced, they're not fixable. So that may be the next large expense, but again, the elementary school was built in 1996, so we're coming up upon 30 years, like that's going to need to be replaced pretty soon, and it could be a sizable cost.
Yeah, that stainless steel is very expensive, and those are typically custom built to spaces, or at least part of them are, because every school serving area is unique, so it has to be designed to fit the space that we have.
It could be well over $100,000 for that purchase, so, but it's good that we're in a position that we're able to do that and not use capital project or general fund money for that purpose, so.
I guess I'm remembering all my notes I made during the audit meeting, the finance meeting, but kudos to yourself and the entire nutrition group. I mean, what we heard about the number of students that continue to buy lunches and it sounded like put us in a different class than other districts, just to recognize that. Good job, and good job to everybody involved. I hear at my own household only compliments about our food service, so great job there. Are there any other questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Bendig.
Thank you.
There is one item on the agenda under legal advisement, LA1. That's for the exoneration of delinquent property taxes. I'll entertain a motion to approve the recommendation of the Erie County Tax Claim Bureau for the removal of taxes for the tax years noted and all future years for parcels number listed. This parcel was recently removed from the assessment records based on the determination of no value or existence of each trailer per field review as outlined in Exhibit E, which is a link.
So moved, push check.
Second, Young.
Thank you. Is there any further discussion or questions on LA1?
I have a clarification question.
Mr. Bremmergen.
It says recently removed from assessment records. Where did it go?
Mrs. Bendick?
So they actually, the building or the.
Trailer.
The dwelling, the trailer?
Yeah, the improvements upon the property, they remove the improvement portion.
Okay.
From my understanding of how it is, we have no control of them doing this. And it's just that we have to have it on our board minutes and have it voted on.
But in the exhibit, it also shows a land value of 0. Most dwellings would still have a land value.
I agree. They should.
So it literally says, all future years, the parcel was recently removed from the assessment records. Like the parcel is gone.
It's a
So
0
if
acre.
it's gone,
Yeah.
where did it get assumed to? Because Mr. Young's a farmer.
Yeah.
Has your land ever disappeared?
No.
I don't believe this is land, though. I know you're
Yeah,
saying.
it's a
in
0
typically-
acre parcel. If,
Yeah.
if you look at the
Correct.
tax
I was just
assessment
curious
record,
if it got assumed by something.
yeah.
I think they demolished it, is what I would assume, that they demolished that trailer so it no longer exists on the property. And they could do that through condemnation, the land bank could take it away. But I agree, normally it's attached to land. To me, when I read that exhibit, it looked like it is not in this case.
And I'm not familiar with that area, so I don't know if anybody's driven past it or not. I was going to, but I didn't have time. But I find that, so this is not a normal thing that comes in front of the board.
No.
Well,
Well.
We had
Occasionally.
4
This
last
type.
month, and this one actually was supposed to be part of that, but she didn't send us the 5th attachment. So typically once per year, if these types of things come up, we're asked to put them on our agenda.
Delinquent taxes, I understand. Just disappearing land I thought was odd.
I don't disagree with you.
Not hearing any other questions. I'll entertain a motion for vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries. The Chair recognizes Dr. Andy Pushak for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have 3 items under finance tonight. F1 is transfers, including 1 item listed on the addendum. F2 is the IRS mileage rate, and F3 is the local audit report that we had presented to us tonight at the Finance Committee meeting. Without objection, I will move all 3 in one motion. So moved.
Second, Heatherington.
Thank you. Do we have any discussion or questions on the 3 items under Finance?
Mr. President,
Dr. Pushak?
echoing your comments, I would like to compliment the administration on another excellent local audit report for our school district financially. We're not only in great hands, but we're being a good steward of the finances with which we're responsible for. So kudos to the administration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. President?
Mr. Remingen?
Even though the minutes from the work session said that all items were available to us online prior to the meeting, there's 2 of the 3 under finance were not available, one of which was Exhibit F. Mrs. Bending, I'm new to all this, so the acronyms and everything is soup to me. But I see on the exhibit that underneath we're transferring $2,565 from instructional tuition, APS, PRRI, MS, to college tuition for high school students underneath the IEP section. I have no clue what that means. Are we transferring, but I saw MS and I saw HS, so I'm assuming we're transferring funds from middle school to high school, and do we transfer funds often? How do we budget? Do we often change funds from one subject group or pupil group to another?
So, yes, we do. That's the short answer. The more explanation is typically when I have budgetary transfers that are transferred between functions. So the 4-digit code in the entire 10-portion code that the state requires us to report in, the 4-digit code, which again, there's a typographical error on this. It should say 10-1100 568-000-2950-000. So the 1,100 is the function. So if I'm moving from one function to another, it has to come before the board. The board has to approve that I have surplus funds in instructional tuition for approved private schools or private residential rehabilitation institutionals, and I need to move it to college tuition for the high school student. So that's why this transfer is here. There is money sitting in this approved private school, middle school line. I believe there's $20,000 budgeted there. Halfway through the school year, we've not had any expenditures to that line. I believe based on last year's, it could be underspent. So I want to transfer money from there to this line to cover this unforeseen expense rather than moving it out of budgetary reserve.
Thank you.
Any other discussion or questions? Did you have something else you want to add? No?
No.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries.
That's all I have for finance, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Pushek. The chair recognizes Mr. Brian Young for Building and Grounds.
Mr. President, I have two for this evening. B1 being the assignment letter, agreement between the school district and Mid-American Natural Resources, outlining who they're sourcing natural gas supply through. And B2, which are two facility use requests seen on the addendum for this evening. The motions to approve two requests, one for the Seneca High School auditorium and classrooms for a dance show, and one for gymnasium use on Saturdays in the month of February for basketball clinic.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Or do we have a motion? Yeah, do we have a second?
Morvay, so second.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussion on the three items under Building and Grounds? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mr. President.
For personnel, pitch hitting, Mr. Steve Morvay.
Mr. President, there are currently 6 items under the personnel line item for this evening, with a few of those that have addendum items included with them. As discussed previously, the items coming for the motion today are P1 substitute additions as listed, P2 tuition reimbursements as listed under Exhibit H, and P1, also has as an addendum, has a name added. Back to P3, resignations, motion to accept the following resignations as noted. P4 is a motion to approve the appointments as noted, as well as the 2 additional bullet items noted in the addendum for appointments. And then item P5, conference requests as noted in the original agenda, as well as 2 additional items in the addendum under P5 conference requests. And lastly, P6, leave requests as listed in the agenda. If there's no objections, I so move those as a entire slate under personnel.
Second, Heatherington.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussion on the 6 items under personnel? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Morvay.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The chair recognizes Ms. Brittany Burlingham for policy.
Thank you, Mr. President. There is nothing under policy today.
Thank you, Mrs. Burlingham. The chair recognizes Mr. Steve Morvay for curriculum.
Mr. President, there are nothing under this board meeting. I look forward to the next board meeting where we will have many curriculum items to discuss.
Thank you, Mr. Morvay. The chair recognizes Mr. Jesse Williams for technology.
No discussion at this time.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Mr. Greg Brummagen for transportation.
Mr. President, I have one, item T1, motion to approve the transportation request and ratification of field trips since last meeting as outlined in Exhibit I and on the addendum as attachment 1.
Thank you.
Morvay, second.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussion on the items under transportation requests?
I have a question.
Mr. Brummagen.
Is it common for the board to approve financials listed as to be determined?
Financials is to be determined. I believe so. Mr. Berlin?
Which
transportation.
There's
that
two
needs
estimated costs underneath the
cost
field
to be
trip that are
calculated
to be
later.
determined. I'm probably never going to say no to a student going on a field trip. I just find it odd to approve financials that aren't spelled out.
Yeah, the board's approving the trips.
Dr. Berlin? So,
On the form is student paid.
that's what I was gonna say.
Student costs are estimated depending, A, on how many students are going, and that student form is in the office. That's, so it would be to be determined because
We just don't know, yeah.
you can estimate it or underestimate it, but that cost would be determined by the number of students and how much you're paying on it.
Sure.
So it's not actually there is, for these items, it says it's funded by the students and the WAM student body, and the Seneca Music Boosters are paying for the band trip, but the estimated cost per student hasn't been determined yet. So, and there is no expense to the board, it's
Correct.
just, are you willing to allow them to go?
Thank you for the clarification. That was one of my questions, was I see it's coming out of the different funded accounts. So did we just not care how much it costs? But one would still assume we're
It's not funded
at all.
with our money.
Money, thank you.
Hearing no other questions or discussions, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Rummaged. The chair recognizes Ms. Leah Hetherington for athletic and extracurricular.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have 3 items on the agenda with an additional item under AE1 and an AE4. AE1 volunteer list with the addition on addendum, AE2 extracurricular appointments as listed, AE3 athletic co-op agreement as listed, and AE4 on the addendum extracurricular resignations as listed. And without objection, I would like to move all 4 items at one time.
Second, Buschak.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussion on the 4 items under athletic extracurricular?
I do have one question.
Mrs. Hetherington?
Dr. Berlin, were you able to get any other information out of the swimming program?
Yeah, I also sent an email around to the board today, so you have that. There's, Mr. Carter had looked into the co-op practice in more detail. So the bottom line is that a host district agreeing to accept co-op students from another district is under their sole discretion. Things that they consider would be PIAA enrollment classification, because when students are co-opted into a sports team from another school, they essentially become part of that team, and they count towards scoring in whatever fashion that athletic activity does it. So that's a consideration, because a district could be bumped to a higher class, for example, where there might be more stiff competition. And with declining student enrollment across the country and state, the PIAA reclassifications, we're dealing with less students, so those bands are getting tighter. So sometimes it would only take a small amount of students to move a district to what they might feel is an unfair classification otherwise, or that they have a choice not to go into. So that's a consideration. And then there's another consideration. I'm probably forgetting something on the list, but there's practical limits to sports participation. That's why some teams get into tryout situations. So a district would consider that too. What's the size of our team? Can we handle, another 2 or 3 kids? Yeah. Could we handle 10 more? We don't know. So that's why the practice within PIAA generally is case by case. Mr. Carter didn't feel comfortable recommending that we tell students, hey, if you want to swim, sign up, here's the list, let's get a whole, and then approach another district, because we might be in a situation where we overpromise and underdeliver to a student. So that's what I found out. It's not, I mean, it's great that we've had school districts like Northeast and Harbor Creek allow students to swim on their teams here. So we're very grateful for that. But it is a case-by-case situation. It's a puzzle that we put together, just trying to do it in the best interest of the students. So that's what we found out at this point. Okay.
Hearing no other discussion or question, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. The motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Hetherington. We have one item under miscellaneous, M1, surplus items. Motion is to approve the following items as surplus, listed below.
Morvay, so moved. Morvay, so moved.
May we have a second?
Second, Young.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussion on those items under the miscellaneous surplus? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. For Erie County Technical School Report, Mr. Morvay.
Mr. President, this is the report for the December board meeting of the Erie County Technical School, which actually was also a combination. We did not have one in November because of the Thanksgiving holiday. So a few of the students of note are catching up. I have given them to Debbie to post. We actually had 4 Wattsburg students that were of note, students of the month. Jacob McGinnett in Auto Tech, Alex Sehan in computer programming, Avril Pushchak in early education, childhood education, and Caitlin Tucholsky in a health assistant. Those are October. And then we had 3. And then in November, that was where Caitlin was listed under the health assessment. So those are posted. I think Debbie's going to put those in the meeting notes, so we'll have those in a for record. Also, we had, the board heard the audit report for the Erie County Technical School. Similarly, we also had a clean opinion, and our report that is also published and posted at that website. They're showing large increases in revenues as well as expenditures, but those are directly tied to the project of the technical school renovation. So those will eventually flatline. They did a 5-year trend analysis, and you can see it's basically a big spike, and then it'll drop back down in both of those budget items. And I believe those might have been one of the items, Dr. Berlin, that was discussed in your superintendent's report or superintendent's meeting as well. One last thing, though, however, the state has not yet assessed the new value of the facilities, so that will show up as an asset to the school, technical school next year, and that'll show up on their books going forward. The largest discussion that we had going at the tech school meeting was regarding programming, and if you recall some of my reports back to this board, I'll try to summarize that for some of the new board members. Last year, there was the need was shown for a second cosmetology program, given that there were so many students that were not getting their first choice to be able to go to cosmetology. Given the renovation that was that was happening within the board, or excuse me, the building, there was a thought that we could add a second cosmetology program with a second lab, and we'd unfortunately have to do some additional renovation to what was already renovated in order to make that happen. And that cost was around $650,000, which would basically wipe out all of the remaining contingency funds in the construction process. So all the districts at that point said, no, we're not going to proceed. However, there was the ability with the additional space to add emergency and protective services, and that was going forward in the fall of 2024. The districts all approved that new programming going forward. So that's a history of currently where we stood through the December board meeting. Now, given that there's been, upon further review, we'll say there is still the need for the second cosmetology program. The additional, I'm trying to look at my notes here. Yeah, so the cosmetology waiting list still is about 57 students. And again, the cosmetology program is a total of 48. So even if we had another program, there would still be a waiting list. The second most requested first choice was the health assistant. That has a waiting list of 38. So given that the reason for the cosmetology discussion back in the spring is still there. There still is a need by the student population of all the participating districts. So there was a discussion, well, how do we try to maybe accommodate those things? Well, within the renovation spaces, there is the ability to expand the cosmetology program into 2 classes with a little bit less renovation, only about $200,000 worth of work that would need some renovation of some of the adjacent spaces, moving some partitions around, some of those things. The lab could be shared, so we won't have to have the expense of a second lab, and basically the instructions would be able to last in an A-B situation. So lab would be A, instruction would be B, and then they'd flip-flop, on the days going forward, which would allow for the second cosmetology program. In addition, there is that, given that space, they can also rearrange some of the programming so that the health assistant program can also be added with a second class. And that's also with some additional space and removing around some of the other folks that are, or some of the other programs, and utilizing the space a little bit more efficiently with that. And that would also still add the environment, or the emergency and protective services program going forward. So what the, and Dr. Berlin has, I believe, has heard all of this in their superintendent's meeting and report, because some of the superintendents were also, again, bringing back the need for the cosmetology program and the health assistants, et cetera. So the tech school has said, how can we solve those problems? So in short, what we're looking to do, and I need to then go back to the board this month with our determination to allow the cosmetology to add a second program, the health assistant program to go to a second program, and then the emergency and protective services to go to the brand new program going forward, with, again, about a $200,000 cost to tweaking some of the rooms around, and we would still have contingency dollars left over from the renovation project, which allows, my opinion in hearing all of that was that's great. We can now then satisfy the student demand with much less costs, as well as allow more students to participate in the tech school. What that would mean for us going forward, just so everyone knows, given that there would be additional programs available, we may send additional students to the tech school, which at our cost that we would participate, that we normally spend when we send students to the tech school. However, given that there's additional, the facilities are the same, there would be an additional teacher. The short version is that the ratio, the cost per pupil, would actually have the ability to go down. And so we would be spending more in total, but our ratio would actually be a little bit less. Dr. Berlin, I think all of these things I'm saying are correct. I've tried to write all my notes as good as I could.
Very good. No, those are good notes.
And again, the work itself would actually be done during the summer, so it's not currently, but it would be ready such that in the fall, these programs then could be added. And then we would also, as a bonus, there still is one additional instructional space that would be available so that in the future, we could potentially even add one more program to the tech school with the spaces that are available. So that's the biggest discussion. So I don't know if I leave this open to the floor as a discussion or if you have questions for me going forward. But again, my charge is to go back to the board actually next week and give them our decision on what we feel as a district.
Are there any questions or discussion from the board? Any clarifications for those that this might be a little bit newer of a topic?
So are we voting on whether we think we should expand the cosmetology, or they're doing that regardless?
I guess it's a, I don't know if I want to say this. This is actually a board vote. Is it a board consensus or a board opinion I'm getting? I'm not sure what the right terminology may be.
Yeah, would there be consensus to support
Fair.
the expansion?
Yes. Thank you for putting words in my mouth.
Because I'm guessing at the time that they make these decisions and they're going to spend contingency money, there will be a board action on
Correct.
our part
Right. And if you
to
recall,
spend the money to do it.
any board action or any action that happens at the tech school needs to be unanimous. And so if one district says, no, we don't want to do it down this road, well, then this will not happen.
So I think we're giving Steve, Mr. Morvay, the indication whether our board overall would support something, not a vote, but just a general support, because then they'll bring that back to his full board of the
Correct.
technical school.
I was just concerned about like an overfull market of that particular
That honestly was a concern. Why?
trade.
Right, in the cosmetology program. The discussion there, it went back and forth, and it's kind of whipsawed. We're going to do cosmetology, no, we're not, now we're going to kind of come back to it because the demand is there. The discussion there was, the data that was presented to us showed that cosmetology is, I'll say it, was not an in-demand career, given the data that the state has presented to us.
And I don't mean to be like, I don't even know the right word, but like, the 10th graders don't really know what they want to do for the rest of their life, for the most part.
The counter argument that I heard was, there's multiple items. One, cosmetology is very female-centric. And in order to get females to come to the tech school, we needed to, as well as health assistant, was just skewed that way. And so the benefit was to allow more females to come in and do what they had preferred. Secondly, the reports we had heard, given the graduates that go out of the program, may not go actually into cosmetology. However, what was learned was that there was many things on how to run a business, how to do accounting, how to manage, people, places, so there's other life skills that they learn
In the cosmetology.
in the
program.
cosmetology program. It may not be cosmetology specific when they leave. They don't all go to work at a salon, but they may work in something else that they have the backbone of those skills that are
I guess
listed.
that would be my question, like, is the success of the students graduating, are they finding jobs that they want to do, whether it's in cosmetology or not?
I would say the overwhelming answer there is yes.
And is my mic on?
Yes.
I also just feel like it's important to say too, because I feel like this is a mindset sometimes that people are still working to get. Cosmetology is very much tied into nurture, self-care, mental health, taking care of ourselves, which is such a big push that is occurring in just overall wellness and careness of your whole being. So there's a lot of people that will tie that into the healing process of the sense of mental health. And I know it sounds odd, but it's very natural for people who work in this field of work to be in a therapeutic role because people are looking to communicate and bond and connect. So I'm just throwing that out there just so people kind of know that there's a big role in that, believe it or not.
Mr. President,
Dr. Pushek.
if I could ask Mr. Morvay, are you aware of an analysis that was done if everybody got their first choice of cosmetology? What would be the impact on all those programs that was their second choice?
Good point.
Because I'm sure they have their
So
choices listed, so we can go down through and say, we had 68 that had first choice cosmetology, but those 68 went here.
yeah.
That's a big chunk.
So there is data that's available, and I'm sure it can be requested from the tech school. Unfortunately, there's two things that happen with someone that does not get their first choice. They either say, I'm not going to tech school, and I'm going to stick in my regular curriculum, or they go into their second choice, and many, many times, and now I don't want to say the majority, but I will say many times, they're not happy. They don't appreciate what that next choice may be or what gives them, because we all like our first choice. And so if we're kind of forced, I don't want to say forced, but we have to settle for their second choice, it's not going to, and which then goes into student motivation, which then goes into performance, that goes into all those things that are, if you are motivated and, you want to participate, you'll just perform better all the way around. So there is data that's there. I'm sorry, I can't read you that chapter and verse.
No, thank you very much. Appreciate the response.
Any other comments or questions? I'll just add, over the history of this renovation and this idea of what could be done with contingency, it does sound like, and the other thing you didn't add there, at one point there was a change in administration. They have a new superintendent.
Correct.
So I appreciate that they've gone through different variations of this and obviously also trying to satisfy a bunch of different school boards and school districts at the same time. So I appreciate that they've thought it through, and if this is what they feel is the best solution, it sounds satisfactory to me that it would be lower cost and more options for students. Might not be perfect, but they're making the best of the situation, it sounds like.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess I will summarize, if I may, for the board, so that in my own head, that we have consensus that we are approving these additional programs and the renovation therein to make those things occur. Is that fair to say? Hearing none?
Yeah. Would support.
Yeah, that the board would support that's going forward.
Yeah, just one thing that might help is the JOC, if you hear, I know the alphabet's soup, I appreciate that, Greg, your comment from earlier. JOC stands for Joint Operating Committee, so they're somewhat of an equivalent to the school board for the tech school, but really, the tech school is run cooperatively among 11 county school districts, each of which has a representative. So there's business they conduct on a regular basis, and Steve is our representative right now. So it represents our board's interest in the functioning of the tech school. So that's, from time to time, it is important for him to know where the board might lie on a situation, that might come before us for some action. But there are some things that happen at the JOC, operational things that they approve, and, he's working in that capacity on our behalf. So it's not a school board in the sense of, what we have here, an elected body.
Forgive me if I've used the incorrect terms for the meetings, for the minutes. Yeah, that is correct. I am a member of the Joint Operating Committee, and it is truly a committee more so than a board. And unfortunately, I've interchanged those too easily.
Thank you, Mr. Morvay. The chair recognizes Dr. Andy Pushak for Northwest Tri-County Intermediate Unit report.
Thank you, Mr. President. Similar to the Erie County Technical School report, I'll report on our December meeting. I do send out the board report that the executive director shares with us at each meeting, so everyone gets a copy of that. The only thing I would like to add, in the season of audits, the IU had their presentation as well. The IU received, and I quote, "unmodified opinion with no findings, no corrected and uncorrected misstatements, no management letter with any further comments." So that is a very good audit for the IU as well. And of note, the fund balance at the IU currently stands at $10 million, $6 million unassigned, $3 million assigned, and $1 million committed. So a good audit by the IU. And as you may know, the IU is a pass-through organization for millions and millions of federal and state dollars, and all have been very well accounted for. So that concludes my report for the IU, Mr. President.
Thank you, Dr. Pushak. Is there any questions on the Northwest Tri-County Intermediate report? Thank you. That brings us to board correspondence and dialogue. Anything from the board this evening?
I just had a quick question I just felt like I wanted to ask after with the whole, when we lost power the other day, there was quite a few parents that were anxious and uncomfortable with the kiddos thing as long as they did. Can you guys just briefly explain, kind of the protocol and how you determined how long the kids were going to stay after the power went out so that the community understands that situation?
Yeah, It's often unknown how long the power is going to be
Sure.
out. We have a direct contact at Penelec because we're a higher priority facility. So there was indication early on that they might be able to restore power earlier. Then it moved to 11 p.m. There's a practical matter of releasing students without enough parental notice. That is a big concern for elementary parents. So that decision, I understand anxiousness from parents, but we are very careful and deliberate to make sure that we don't make that decision too quickly and send elementary students in particular home to empty houses. I've managed quite a few early dismissals over the years. The earlier they are in the afternoon, the more disruptive they are to families and routines and other businesses. So it does take time to notify those people and then for them to make arrangements to leave work and or get somebody home. So that's why the text messages were going out, no dismissal will occur before 12, because that creates an equal, if not greater, amount of anxiety. So what I do want to say, though, is everyone, the staff, the students, really handled that well. The maintenance personnel, custodian, all of our service personnel, secretaries, nurses, everybody, I don't want to leave anybody out. But those are not fun days, and every time we get a power outage out here, the longer I'm here, it's more and more of a disruption because how much we use technology, it runs everything. So we have a pretty big list of things that we're going to debrief. We need to beef up a few backup systems. There was a hiccup that caused phones not to go directly to Seneca, and the workaround was to call the admin office. So, those are some things we've identified that can be easily solved. But kudos to the staff, the cafeteria. I could go on, but that was the other thing. We wanted to feed the kids. We didn't want to send anybody home hungry. And so the cafeteria, especially over here in elementary, condensed their operations and fed almost 500 kids in probably 2/3 of the time they normally do. And another school district, Iroquois School District, stepped in. They also are tied to Nutrition Inc., and they helped us with some supplies and things and some food prep. So overall, I don't want to say it was a good power outage, but everyone handled it well.
No, thank you, Dr. Berlin. And I feel like, we had great communication, and I feel like there was probably a lot of thought and processing behind it. I can't imagine or would want to do it, but I just feel like I felt like I just want to ask this question, so then if people really want to know, now they can understand this is what went behind that. And I agree with all those reasonings. They were all very thoughtful reasonings as to why there was a process on how to wait to dismiss. So I appreciate that. That's all I have.
Thank you. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Hey, I do have one more thing.
Sure.
January is Board Appreciation month, so we want to end on a high note. We do have a small token of appreciation for each board member. We do this every January. Your time is really very valuable, and it's selfless service, but to some degree, but you do it for your students and your community and your families and your neighbors. And I don't think board members get thanked enough for a tough job. So thank you. And if you're going to distribute those. And then don't forget, next week we'll meet here at the elementary for a session with a PSBA consultant. And Attorney Kennedy will join us if she can. Attorney McClure will probably join us via phone or teleconference at some point, but it's going to be a good opportunity to discuss a lot of the questions that came up tonight. And, you know, we're not conducting business, so we'll be able to meet and have, you know, a conversation. So that's next week. Oh, and we do have dinner starting at 5:30. Well,
Great, thank you.
that's all I have.
Did you say we're here, like in this?
Well, I mean, come to the district admin office. If we change locations, like to one of the other two schools, I'll send it out to everybody. Might be possible. I don't know if we're going to fit in that conference room, so,
They're invited.
but for right now, that's the plan.
Dr. Berlin, any update on access, the badging, keys?
No.
Thank you.
That's a,
So noted, sir.
Yeah,
Thank
that's-
you. Yes.
We'll get you in the door next week.
Hearing none.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, push check.
Second, Burlingham.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned.